The chamber stretched for what seemed like miles in every direction. Floating platforms hung suspended in the void, each one carrying representatives from species that humanity had never imagined could exist. Some were towering creatures of living crystal. Others were clouds of sentient gas held together by magnetic fields. A few were so alien that the human eye could not fully comprehend their forms. Ambassador James Harlow stood at the center of it all, alone on a small circular platform that felt more like a target than a stage. Above him, below him, and all around him, over 800 alien species watched in silence. The Galactic Council had assembled in full session for the first time in 300 years, and they had assembled to judge humanity. The voice that spoke was not a voice at all. It was a vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once, translated directly into human language through technology that made Earth's most advanced systems look like children's toys. Species designation human. Origin world Terra. You stand before the Council to receive judgment on your application for galactic membership. James kept his breathing steady. His training had prepared him for hostile negotiations, for difficult diplomats, for tense standoffs. Nothing had prepared him for this. The weight of 8 billion lives pressed down on his shoulders as he lifted his chin and faced the impossible assembly. The Council recognizes humanity, he replied, his voice amplified by the translation systems. We are honored to be considered for membership. A ripple of movement passed through the chamber. On a platform to his left, a massive insectoid creature leaned forward. High Arbiter Krellox, the leader of the Valthran Dominion and the most powerful voice on the Council. His compound eyes reflected James like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Honored? Krellox's mandibles clicked with what might have been amusement. You misunderstand the nature of this gathering, human. You are not being considered for membership. You are being assessed for tribute. James felt his stomach drop, but he kept his expression neutral. I am not familiar with that term in this context, High Arbiter. Then allow me to educate you. Krellox rose to his full height, nearly 12 feet of armored chitin and barely contained predatory instinct. The galaxy operates on a simple principle. The strong protect the weak. In exchange, the weak provide resources, labor, and service. Your species has been observed for the past 50 years. We have determined your value. A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the chamber. Earth appeared, rotating slowly. Its blue oceans and green continents, heartbreakingly beautiful against the darkness of space. Terra will provide 60% of its agricultural output to feed Dominion colonies. You will provide 40% of your mineral wealth for Council construction projects. And you will provide 5 million of your population each cycle for labor redistribution. The numbers hit James like physical blows. 60% of their food, 40% of their resources. 5 million people taken from their homes and shipped across the stars to serve alien masters. This is slavery, James said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is civilization, Krellox responded. Every species in this chamber has paid their tribute. It is the price of protection, of technology, of being permitted to exist within Council space. James looked around the vast assembly. Now he understood the silence. These were not neutral observers. These were conquered peoples, watching another species receive the same chains they wore. But something caught his attention. On a distant platform, partially hidden in shadow, a figure was making a subtle gesture. A being that looked almost reptilian, with scaled skin and intelligent eyes, was tapping its chest twice and pointing at James. A signal. But what did it mean? What happens if we refuse? James asked, turning back to face Krellox. The High Arbiter went very still. Around the chamber, the silence deepened into something that felt almost dangerous. No species has refused tribute in 11,000 years, Krulok said slowly. The last civilization that attempted resistance was the Mordathi. Perhaps you have heard of them? James shook his head. Exactly. Krulok's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. Their worlds are asteroid fields now. Their people are genetic samples in our archives. Refusal is not an option, human. It is extinction. For a long moment, James said nothing. His mind raced through possibilities, through training scenarios, through everything he knew about negotiation and survival. The odds were impossible. Humanity had barely developed faster than light travel. They had no fleet capable of challenging the Council. They were alone in a galaxy that had already been conquered, but they were not helpless. High Arbiter, James began, choosing his words with extreme care. Humanity accepts that we are new to the galactic community. We accept that there are powers here far beyond our current capabilities. However, before we discuss tribute, I must inform you of certain facts about our species that your observation teams may have missed. Krulok tilted his massive head. You are in no position to negotiate, human. I am not negotiating. I am providing information that the Council needs to make an informed decision. James reached into his jacket and produced a small device. With your permission, I would like to share some historical data about humanity. After a moment of consideration, Krulok gestured with one of his secondary arms. Proceed. It will change nothing, but the Council is curious about your delusions. The holographic display shifted as James activated his device. Earth disappeared, replaced by images that made several alien species gasp or cry out in their various languages. Mushroom clouds rising over cities. Trenches filled with bodies. Ships sinking in burning oceans. Nuclear missiles ready for launch. Chemical weapons. Biological agents. The entire brutal history of human warfare compressed into a single devastating presentation. This is what we do to each other, James said quietly. When we disagree about land, about resources, about ideas, this is how we settle our disputes. We have killed hundreds of millions of our own kind in wars that lasted years, sometimes decades. He let the images cycle through. The Council chamber had gone completely silent. Your observation team saw our art, our music, our science. They saw the face we show to the universe. James turned to look directly at Krulok. But they did not see what we hide. They did not understand what humanity becomes when we are threatened. Krulok's compound eyes flickered. You are attempting to frighten us with your primitive violence? We have conquered species that could destroy stars. And yet here I stand, James replied, speaking to you as if I have any chance at all of walking out of this chamber. Why do you think that is, High Arbiter? Before Krulok could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the Council chamber. Emergency lights bathed everything in crimson. Voices cried out in confusion as displays flickered and systems malfunctioned. What is happening? Krulok demanded, turning to his advisors. On his platform, James checked his watch and smiled. Right on time. That would be Phase 1, he said calmly. Humanity did not come here to accept tribute, High Arbiter. We came here to deliver a message. The main display, the one that had shown Earth, suddenly changed. It now showed something else entirely. A fleet, a human fleet. Thousands of ships that should not exist, surrounding the Council station itself. The message is simple, James continued, as chaos erupted around him. We do not kneel. The alarms continued to scream through the Council chamber as 800 species descended into panic. Platforms that had floated in perfect silence now drifted, erratically, as representatives scrambled to understand what was happening. Some tried to flee through emergency portals. Others simply stood frozen, watching the impossible unfold on the main display. High Arbiter Krulok remained motionless on his platform, his compound eyes fixed on the human fleet that had appeared from nowhere. His tactical mind processed the information rapidly. 3,000 ships. Designs that did not match any human vessels in the Council archives. Weapons signatures that his systems could not identify. This was not supposed to be possible. How? The word escaped his mandibles before he could stop it. Ambassador James Harlow still stood on his small platform, calm in the middle of the storm he had created. How did we build a fleet without you noticing? How did we position them around your most secure station without triggering a single alarm? How did we keep this secret for 50 years while your observers watched our every move? He let the questions hang in the air for a moment before continuing. The answer is simple. High Arbiter. You saw what we wanted you to see. You studied the face we chose to show you. And while you were busy calculating our tribute value, we were preparing for this exact moment. Kralox's secondary arms twitched in agitation. This changes nothing. Your fleet is impressive for a primitive species, but the Council commands millions of vessels. You cannot hope to challenge our combined military power. You are absolutely correct, James agreed. Which is why we are not here to fight you. The display shifted again. The human fleet remained, but now it showed something else. Something that made even Kralox take a step backward. Scattered throughout the Council station, highlighted in pulsing red, were hundreds of small devices. They were everywhere. In the power systems, in the life support modules, in the structural supports that held the entire massive structure together. We placed those over the past decade, James explained. Your security is excellent against external threats, but you never expected anyone to smuggle in equipment, piece by piece, through legitimate diplomatic channels. Every trade delegation, every cultural exchange, every scientific conference was an opportunity. A new voice cut through the chaos. It came from the shadowed platform where James had noticed the reptilian figure earlier. The being stepped forward into the light, revealing deep green scales and eyes that burned with ancient hatred. Counselors, the reptilian spoke, I am Elder Voreth of the Serani Collective, and I must inform you that humanity is not acting alone. The chamber somehow grew even quieter. The Serani were one of the oldest conquered species, brought into the Council system over 6,000 years ago. They had been considered completely pacified, their warrior spirit broken generations past. Elder Voreth continued, his voice carrying across the vast space. For 300 years, the Serani have been secretly communicating with other tribute species. The Moldrani, the Kelith, the Frost Clans, the burning minds of the Seventh Reach. When humanity made first contact with our network, they brought something we had lost long ago, hope. More figures began emerging from the shadows around the chamber. Representatives who had sat in silence suddenly stood and moved to join Voreth. 20 species, 30, 50. You built your empire on isolation, James said to Kralox. You kept the tribute species separate, unable to communicate, unable to organize. But you forgot something important. Pain has a way of finding common ground. Kralox turned to his advisors, his movements sharp with barely controlled fury. Contact our fleet commanders. I want every available ship at this station within the hour. High Arbiter, one advisor responded nervously. Communications are being jammed. We cannot reach anyone outside the chamber. Then use backup systems. Those are jammed as well. The humans had deployed some form of wide-range interference. Nothing is getting through. For the first time in his 1,000-year existence, Kralox felt the cold touch of fear. He had built his power on certainty, on overwhelming force, on the simple mathematics of conquest. Now those calculations were failing him. James watched the High Arbiter's composure crack and felt no satisfaction. This was not about revenge or punishment. This was about survival. High Arbiter, I want to be very clear about something, James said, his voice cutting through the noise. Humanity does not want war. We do not want to destroy the Council or throw the galaxy into chaos. We understand that would cause suffering for billions of innocent beings. He paused, letting his words sink in. But we will do it if we have to. Those devices throughout your station are antimatter charges. If they detonate, this entire structure and everyone on it will cease to exist. The Galactic Council will lose its leadership in a single moment. And our fleet will begin broadcasting everything. Every secret. Every hidden agreement. Every shameful act your empire has committed in 11,000 years. Kralox's mandibles clicked slowly. You would kill yourselves along with us. Yes, James replied simply. We would. That is the part about humanity that your observers failed to understand. We are not afraid of death. We have faced extinction before. We have looked into the void and chosen to fight even when there was no hope of victory. He took a step forward on his platform, closing the distance between himself and the High Arbiter. The question you need to ask yourself is this. Are you willing to die today? Are your council members willing to die? Because I promise you, High Arbiter, every single human on this station has already made peace with that possibility. We decided before we came here that freedom was worth more than survival. The silence stretched out. Around the chamber, council members were looking at Kralox, waiting for his response. The tribute species stood together in their own group, their presence a visible symbol of the uprising that had been brewing for centuries. Finally, Elder Vorath spoke again. High Arbiter, humanity has offered you a choice that no species has been given before. They are not asking you to surrender. They are asking you to negotiate. Negotiate, Kralox repeated, as if the word was foreign to him. As equals, James confirmed. No tribute. No slavery. A new system where every species has a voice, where trade is fair, where conflicts are resolved through discussion rather than conquest. It is possible. We have spent 50 years designing it. One of the council advisors leaned close to Kralox and whispered urgently. James could not hear the words, but he saw the effect they had. The High Arbiter seemed to age decades in a single moment. You are asking me to destroy everything I have built, Kralox said finally. I am asking you to build something better, James replied. Something that does not require chains to hold it together. The display flickered again. Now it showed not just the human fleet, but other ships arriving. Ships bearing the symbols of the Serani, the Moldrani, the Keleth, and dozens of other species. The rebellion was not just theoretical. It was here, now, surrounding the council station, in numbers that even Kralox could not ignore. You have planned this very carefully, Kralox observed. For 50 years, James confirmed. Every detail, every contingency, every possible response you might have. We are not reckless, High Arbiter. We are simply determined. Kralox looked at the display, at the gathered rebel species, at the humans standing alone on his platform with enough courage to threaten the most powerful empire in galactic history. Then he did something that no one expected. He laughed. Human, he said, I have lived for 1,000 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have witnessed the birth of stars and the death of worlds. But I have never met a species quite like yours. He turned to face the council chamber, raising all 4 of his arms in a gesture that commanded attention. The council will hear humanity's proposal, he announced. We will negotiate. But even as the words left his mouth, James noticed something. A small light blinking on Kralox's personal display. A private message that had somehow gotten through the jamming, and the look that crossed the High Arbiter's face told James that this was far from over, the message that arrived on. Kralox's private display changed everything. Ambassador James Harlow watched the High Arbiter's compound eyes flicker rapidly, a sign of intense mental processing that he had learned to recognize during his decades of preparation. Something had happened. Something that Krellox had not anticipated, but something that gave him new confidence. The negotiations were supposed to begin immediately. Instead, Krellox raised one arm, and the chamber fell silent once more. "There will be a brief recess," a High Arbiter announced. "The Council requires time to consider the human proposal." James felt the cold grip of suspicion tighten around his chest. This was not part of the plan. Every scenario they had prepared for, every possible response they had anticipated, none of them included a delay. Krellox was buying time. But for what? "High Arbiter," James called out, "every minute of delay increases the risk for everyone in this chamber. We should proceed immediately." "The Council does not take orders from tribute species," Krellox replied. And there was something new in his voice. Confidence. The desperate uncertainty from moments ago had vanished, replaced by the cold arrogance of power. "You will wait." The platforms began to move, separating the species into different sections of the chamber. James found himself suddenly isolated. The rebel representatives pulled away to distant corners where communication would be difficult. The Sarani, the Moldrani, the others who had stood with humanity, were being scattered like seeds in the wind. Elder Voreth managed to catch James's eye before his platform drifted too far. The reptilian elder tapped his chest twice and pointed upward. The same signal from before. James finally understood its meaning. Look up. Something is coming from above. James tilted his head back, staring at the vast ceiling of the council chamber. At first, he saw nothing. Just the endless expanse of suspended platforms and the artificial stars that provided illumination. But then he noticed it. A faint shimmer in the air, like heat rising from summer pavement. Something was there. Something invisible. "Admiral Chun," James whispered into his concealed communication device, "do you have eyes on the station's upper sections?" The response came through encrypted channels, breaking through the jamming that still blocked all council communications. "Ambassador, we are detecting energy signatures above the main chamber. The signatures match Valthran's stealth technology. They have ships inside the station." James's blood ran cold. Ships inside the station. The council had prepared their own trap within a trap. How many? He asked, unknown. "The stealth technology is preventing accurate scans. Could be dozens. Could be hundreds." James looked around the chamber. The council members were settling into their new positions, the delay giving them time to receive their own secret communications, their own hidden instructions. He could see the shift in their body language. Fear was transforming into anticipation. They knew something was about to happen. The human fleet still surrounded the station. The antimatter charges were still in place. But now there was a new variable, one that could change everything. "High Arbiter," James called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs that filled the chamber. "Before this recess continues, I need to inform you of something." Krellox turned his massive head, compound eyes gleaming with barely concealed triumph. "You have more threats to deliver, human?" "Not a threat. A fact." James pulled out his personal display device and held it up so the entire chamber could see. "You believe you have hidden ships positioned above us. You believe that when the moment is right, those ships will neutralize our forces and restore council control." The chamber went dead silent. Around the room, council members froze in mid-motion. Krellox's mandibles stopped clicking entirely. "How could you possibly know that?" The High Arbiter demanded. "Because we told you about our preparations, but we did not tell you everything." James activated his device. "For example, we did not mention the Sarani network that has been operating inside the Valthran military for 3,000 years. Elder Voreth's people are excellent at playing the long game. Above the chamber, the shimmer in the air began to fade. The stealth fields were dropping. But instead of Valthran warships preparing to attack, James saw something else entirely. Ships bearing Serani markings. Ships crewed by members of species that the Council had thought completely controlled. Your hidden fleet has been our hidden fleet for the past century, James continued. The crews you trusted were recruited by the rebellion generations ago. They have been waiting for this moment their entire lives. Krulok stared at the revealed ships, his ancient mind struggling to process the depth of the betrayal. Impossible. Our loyalty conditioning is absolute. No conquered species has ever broken free of it. Your loyalty conditioning works on most species, Elder Voreth replied, his platform moving closer to the center of the chamber. But the Serani developed immunity 3,000 years ago. We simply chose to let you believe it still worked. The High Arbiter rounded on his advisors. How did our intelligence fail so completely? How did we miss this? You missed it because you were not looking, James answered. You built an empire on the assumption that conquered peoples would stay conquered. You never imagined that your subjects might be smarter than you, more patient than you, more determined than you. He gestured at the chamber, at the hundreds of species watching in stunned silence. Every species here has a choice to make right now. You can stand with the Council and try to maintain a system built on suffering and exploitation. Or you can stand with us and help build something new. One of the Council members, a being of living flame contained within a crystalline shell, spoke for the first time. Human, you speak of building something new. But what guarantee do we have that humanity will not simply replace the Council as the new masters of the galaxy? It was a fair question. James had prepared for it. You have no guarantee, he admitted. Only my word and the word of every human who has worked toward this moment. We do not want to rule the galaxy. We want to live in it. As equals, as partners, as neighbors. He looked directly at the being of flame. We are offering you something that the Council never has. Trust, not forced loyalty, not conditioned obedience. Genuine trust, freely given, that can be withdrawn if we break our promises. Pretty words, Krulok interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. But words do not stock weapons. You have surrounded us with ships and planted bombs in our walls. How is that trust? Those are precautions, not punishment, James replied. We came here knowing that the Council would never negotiate in good faith without motivation. The ships and the charges are that motivation. But I give you my word, on the honor of my species, that if you choose peace, those weapons will never be used. The chamber held its breath. Representatives of 800 species weighed the options before them. 11,000 years of history against the promise of a future that no one had dared imagine. Then something unexpected happened. One of the smaller platforms, carrying a species James did not recognize, began to move. It drifted slowly away from the Council section and toward the area where the rebel species had gathered. Then another platform moved. And another. What are you doing? Krulok demanded. Return to your positions immediately. No one obeyed. The platforms kept moving, carrying species that had been conquered for millennia. Species that had paid tribute in blood and suffering. Species that had been told they were inferior and helpless and alone. They were not alone anymore. Within minutes, the chamber had reorganized itself. On one side stood Krulok and the Valthran Dominion, supported by a handful of their closest allies. On the other side stood humanity, the rebel coalition, and over 600 species. Who had chosen hope over fear. James looked at the new alignment and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in 50 years of preparation. Pride. High Arbiter, he said quietly. It appears the galaxy has made its choice. Krulok stood alone on his platform, surrounded by advisors who could not meet his eyes. For the first time in his 1,000 years of life, he was facing something he could not control, and somewhere in the depths of the council station, a small group of humans were making their way toward a system that would change the galaxy forever. Deep beneath the council station, in corridors that officially did not exist, Captain Maria Santos led her team through the darkness. 5 humans moved in perfect silence, their footsteps absorbed by advanced sound-dampening technology that made them ghosts in the machine. Above them, Ambassador James Harlow was buying time with words. Down here, the real work was being done. 200 meters to the primary data core, Lieutenant Torres whispered, his voice barely audible even through their internal communications. Security patterns show a gap in 30 seconds. Maria held up her fist, signaling the team to stop. Through her night vision display, she could see the corridor ahead, lined with sensors that would detect any biological presence. The Council had built their station to be impenetrable, but they had never faced humans before. Deploying countermeasures, she ordered. Torres released a cloud of microscopic particles that would confuse the sensors for exactly 45 seconds, long enough to pass through if they moved fast. The team surged forward, each member knowing exactly where to place their feet, exactly how to move their bodies to minimize detection. They had trained for this mission for 3 years. Every step had been rehearsed 1,000 times. Maria reached the data core entrance first. The door was sealed with encryption that the Council considered unbreakable. Their best minds had spent centuries developing it. Human cryptographers had cracked it in 18 months. She entered the code sequence and the door slid open silently. Inside, the data core hummed with the collective knowledge of 11,000 years of galactic civilization. Trade agreements, military deployments, scientific research, and most importantly, the tribute records. Every species that had been conquered, every population that had been enslaved, every world that had been stripped of its resources, not all of it was about to become public. "We are in," Maria reported through the encrypted channel that connected her directly to Ambassador Harlow. "Beginning data extraction now." In the main chamber above, James received the message and felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Phase 2 was proceeding on schedule. High Arbiter Krulok was still standing on his platform, surrounded by the few species that had remained loyal to the Council. His compound eyes moved constantly, tracking the movements of the rebel coalition, calculating options that were rapidly diminishing. "Human," Krulok said finally, his voice carrying across the chamber, "you have won this round. But you must understand what you are doing. The Council is not simply a government. It is the foundation of galactic civilization. If it falls, chaos will follow." "We are not trying to destroy civilization," James replied. "We are trying to improve it. You are naive. The galaxy is not your pleasant little world where disagreements can be solved with conversation. There are threats out there that you cannot imagine. The Council exists to protect all species from those threats." James considered the High Arbiter's words carefully. During the 50 years of preparation, human analysts had debated this exact question. Was the Council purely evil, or did it serve some necessary purpose that humanity could not see? The answer they had arrived at was uncomfortable but important. "We know about the outer threats," James said. "The void entities beyond the galactic rim. The machine consciousness in the dark spaces between stars. We have studied your records." Krulok's mandibles stopped clicking. "How could you possibly have access to those records?" "The same way we have access to everything else. Patient work over many years." James stepped forward on his platform. "We know that the Council was originally formed to defend against external dangers. We know that the tribute system began as a way to fund that defense. But somewhere along the way, defense became domination. Protection became control. He gestured at the gathered species around the chamber. These people paid their tribute for thousands of years, trusting that the council was UC. And those resources to keep them safe. But your military budgets tell a different story. Less than 10% of tribute goes to border defense. The rest funds luxury for the ruling species, expansion projects that serve no strategic purpose, and internal security forces designed to keep the population obedient. Krellox was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that might have been weariness. You think you are the first species to notice these things? The first to question the system? There have been others. Hundreds of others, over the millennia. They all came to the same conclusions you have reached. And they all failed. We are not them, James replied simply. No, you are not. Krellox looked at the human with something that might have been respect. You are more dangerous, more patient, more willing to sacrifice. Deep below, Maria's team finished their extraction. Centuries of hidden data downloaded into human storage devices. Evidence of atrocities. Records of species that had been erased from history. Proof that the Council's public image was a carefully constructed lie. We have everything, Maria reported. Beginning Phase 3. James nodded imperceptibly. High Arbiter, in approximately 30 seconds, your communication systems will come back online. When they do, every species in the galaxy will receive a broadcast. That broadcast will contain the true history of the Council, the real numbers, the actual records of what was done with tribute resources. Krellox's eyes flickered rapidly. You would expose everything? Even the records of species that cooperated with us? The truth is more important than comfort, James replied. Every species deserves to know what was done in their name. They can decide for themselves how to respond. Around the chamber, Council members began speaking urgently into their communication devices, trying to send warnings, trying to prepare for what was coming. But the jamming was still active. Nothing was getting through. You will create chaos, Krellox warned. Species will turn on each other. Old grudges will resurface. The stability we have maintained for 11,000 years will collapse. Or, James countered, people will finally be able to heal. Wounds cannot close while they are hidden. Justice cannot be achieved while the crimes are secret. The countdown reached 0. The jamming dropped. And across the galaxy, on every world that could receive transmissions, the truth began to spread. On the Council station, the reaction was immediate. Species that had not moved during the entire confrontation suddenly began shouting, demanding answers, confronting their neighbors about revelations that changed everything they thought they knew. Maria's team emerged from the maintenance corridors, joining the other humans in the chamber. Their mission was complete. Now came the hard part. High Arbiter, James said, raising his voice to be heard above the chaos. The old system is ending. A new one must take its place. We can build it together, or we can build it without you. The choice is yours. Krellox watched the pandemonium unfold around him. Species that had been allies for millennia were now screaming accusations at each other. Others were embracing members of the rebel coalition, finding common ground in shared suffering. The carefully ordered hierarchy of the Council was dissolving before his eyes. You truly believe you can build something better from this? The High Arbiter asked. We have to try, James replied. The alternative is letting the old cycle continue. Conquest, tribute, oppression, rebellion. Over and over forever. Humanity refuses to be part of that cycle. For a long moment, Krellox said nothing. Then, slowly, he reached up and removed the ceremonial badge that marked his rank as High Arbiter. He held it in his hand, looking at it as if seeing it for the first time. I have worn this for 800 years, he said quietly. I received it from my predecessor, who received it from his, in a chain stretching back to the founding of the Council. I believed that it made me a protector, a guardian of civilization." He looked up at James, and for the first time, the human saw something other than a conqueror. He saw a being who had genuinely believed in the system he served. Perhaps I was wrong. Kralox dropped the badge. It fell slowly in the artificial gravity, spinning as it descended toward the floor far below. "Very well, human. Let us see what you can build." But even as he spoke the words, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Not the alarms from before. New ones. External threat warnings. On the main display, something appeared at the edge of council space. Something that made every species in the chamber go silent with primal fear. The void. Entities had arrived, and they had chosen this exact moment to attack. The display showed darkness made solid. Shapes that moved through space without following the laws of physics. Entities that had haunted the collective nightmares of galactic civilization since the first species looked up at the stars. The void had come. Ambassador. James Harlow stared at the screen, his carefully constructed plans suddenly irrelevant. Every scenario his people had prepared for, every contingency they had developed over 50 years, none of them had included this. The ancient enemy that the Council had been supposedly defending against for 11 millennia had chosen this exact moment to reveal itself. How many? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elder Vorth moved his platform closer, his scaled face pale beneath its natural green coloring. Thousands. Tens of thousands. More than have been seen in recorded history. Around the chamber, species that had been arguing moments ago now stood frozen in shared terror. The rebels and the loyalists, the conquerors and the conquered, all of them united by a fear that transcended politics and grudges. High Arbiter Kralox straightened his massive form. And for a moment, James saw the leader he must have been in his youth. Not a tyrant, but a protector. A being who had genuinely believed his empire was necessary for survival. Human, Kralox said, your rebellion has come at the worst possible time. The Council's fleet is scattered, responding to your provocations. Our defenses are compromised by your allies' infiltration. We cannot mount an effective response. James felt the weight of those words pressing down on him. Had humanity's fight for freedom doomed the entire galaxy? No, he said, rejecting the thought before it could take hold. We did not cause this. The void has been watching, waiting for an opportunity. If it was not today, it would have been tomorrow, or next year, or the year after. They attack when they see weakness. Then they have found it. Kralox replied bitterly. James turned to face the chamber, his mind racing through possibilities. The human fleet was still positioned around the station. 3,000 ships designed for a completely different kind of warfare. Could they make a difference against an enemy that defied conventional physics? There was only one way to find out. Admiral Chun, he spoke into his communication device, prepare the fleet for combat operations. Target the void formations at the edge of sensor range. The response came immediately. Ambassador, our weapons were designed to fight the Council. We have no data on void entity vulnerabilities. Then we will gather some. James looked at Kralox. High Arbiter, I am offering you a choice. We can continue fighting each other while the void consumes everything, or we can work together right now. Your military knowledge and our fleet, combined. Kralox's compound eyes flickered. You would trust me? After everything? I would trust anyone who wants to survive. And I think, despite our differences, we both want that. For a heartbeat, the chamber held its breath. The entire future of galactic civilization balanced on the response of one ancient being who had spent his entire life as a conqueror. Very well, Kralox said finally. I will share our combat data on the void, everything we have learned in 11,000 years of border skirmishes. In exchange, I want your word that if we survive this, humanity will honor its promise to build something better." James extended his hand in the human gesture of agreement. "You have my word." Krulok stared at the offered hand for a moment, then reached out with one of his secondary arms and grasped it. The grip was strange, alien, but surprisingly gentle. "Then let us see what humans can do against the darkness." The next hours were chaos organized into purpose. Human ships integrated with Council vessels that had been enemies moments before. Sarani navigators shared coordinates with Valthran weapons officers. Species that had never spoken to each other now fought side by side against a threat that cared nothing for their politics. Captain Maria Santos found herself commanding a mixed squadron of human destroyers and Council cruisers. Her second in command was a Moldrani officer named Kelith, a being of crystalline structure who communicated through patterns of light. "The void formations are not responding to standard weapons," Kelith reported, his form flickering with concern. "Energy dissipates before impact. Kinetic projectiles pass through without effect." Maria studied the tactical display, watching as the combined fleet threw everything they had at the advancing darkness. Nothing was working. The void simply absorbed or ignored every attack, but she noticed something else. A pattern in the way the void moved. Not random sitch. OS, but coordinated behavior. They were avoiding certain areas of space, flowing around invisible obstacles. "Lieutenant Torres," she called to her science officer, "what are those regions the void is avoiding?" Torres examined the data. High-gravity wells. Areas of intense gravitational distortion. They seemed to have difficulty maintaining cohesion in those conditions. Maria felt a spark of hope. Can we create artificial gravity distortions? Not with our current technology. We would need something capable of bending space itself. Elder Voreth's voice crackled through the communication system. The Sarani possess such technology. We developed it in secret before the Council discovered our research and confiscated our equipment. But we kept the designs. We always kept the designs. James Harlow's voice joined the channel. "Elder Voreth, how quickly can you build these devices? With the resources on this station? Hours, perhaps less if every species contributes their manufacturing capabilities." "Do it." The station transformed into a factory. Species that had never cooperated now worked together with desperate efficiency. Sarani engineers directed Valthran construction drones. Human technicians calibrated equipment designed by the Frost clans. The burning minds contributed computational power that accelerated every process. Meanwhile, the combined fleet fell back, giving ground to the advancing void while the weapons were being prepared. Ships were destroyed. Lives were lost. But they bought time with blood and courage. James stood in the command center, watching the battle unfold. Beside him, Krulok directed Council forces with the skill of 1,000 years of experience. They did not speak except to coordinate movements. But a strange understanding had developed between them. "The devices are ready," Elder Voreth announced. "Deploy them in a defensive perimeter," James ordered. Maximum coverage. Hundreds of small satellites launched from the station, spreading out in a carefully calculated pattern. When they activated, space itself seemed to ripple. Gravity wells formed where none had existed before, creating a barrier of distorted reality. The void hit the barrier and recoiled. For the first time since the battle began, the ancient enemy hesitated. "It is working," Kelith reported, his crystalline form blazing with triumph. "They cannot pass through the distortion field." But James watched the display with growing concern. The void was not retreating. It was probing, searching for weaknesses. And the devices were draining power at an unsustainable rate. "We have maybe an hour before the barrier fails," he said. "We need a permanent solution." Krullox turned his massive head toward the human. There is one option, but it requires a sacrifice that no species has ever been willing to make. Tell me. The void originates from a specific point beyond the galactic rim. A tier in reality that has existed since before recorded history. It can be closed, but doing so requires detonating a singularity bomb at its exact location. The explosion would collapse the tier permanently. Then why has no one done it? Because the bomber would not survive. The gravitational forces would destroy any ship before it could escape. James stared at the display, at the swirling darkness pressing against the barrier. Somewhere out there was a wound in the universe that had threatened all life for millions of years. And it could be healed. I will go, he said quietly. The chamber fell silent. Krullox turned his compound eyes on the human with something that looked almost like grief. Ambassador, you are the architect of everything that has happened today. Your species needs you to lead them into this new era. My species needs a future to lead them into. James straightened his shoulders. Every human leader learns the same lesson. Sometimes the shepherd must face the wolf alone. He began walking toward the exit, toward the hangar where his personal shuttle waited. Captain Santos stepped forward to block his path. Sir, I cannot let you do this. Maria, that is an order. With respect, Ambassador, no. She met his eyes with fierce determination. I am faster, better trained, and I do not have 8 billion people waiting for me to negotiate their place in a new galactic order. If someone has to fly into certain death, it should be me. Before James could respond, Elder Vorith spoke. It should be both of you, and me, and anyone else who volunteers. Around the command center, beings began stepping forward. Humans, Sarani, Maldrani, even several council officers who had been enemies hours ago. Each one offering their life for a chance to save everyone else. James felt his eyes sting with emotion he could not name. This was what humanity had been fighting for. Not dominance, not revenge, connection, understanding, species willing to die for each other because they had finally recognized that they were all in this together. One ship is enough, he said finally, and it will carry representatives from every species that volunteers. If we are going to close this wound, we will do it together. The mission ship launched 30 minutes later. A small vessel crewed by 12 beings from 12 different species, carrying a weapon capable of reshaping reality. They passed through the barrier and into the darkness beyond. Nobody in the command center spoke as they watched the ship's signal move toward the distant tier. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. A signal reached its destination. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the display lit up with energy readings that exceeded every sensor's capacity. A flash of light that was visible across half the galaxy. And when the light faded, the tier was gone. So was the ship. But the void that had threatened to consume everything began to dissolve. Without their connection to their origin point, the entities lost cohesion. They faded like nightmares at dawn, dissipating into the void they had once claimed. The galaxy was saved. In the command center, Krullox turned to James Harlow. Your people died as heroes. They died as part of something larger than themselves, James replied. That is what humanity has always believed. That connection matters more than survival. That what we build together is worth more than what we keep alone. He looked around the chamber at the hundreds of species who had fought beside each other against impossible odds. The old council is gone. The tribute system is ended. But we still need something to hold us together. Not through force, but through choice. He stepped forward to the central platform, the same platform where he had first faced the threat at conquest. I propose a new alliance. Every species with an equal voice. Decisions made through discussion, not domination. Resources shared based on need, not taken through threat. And a commitment to face every challenge together as we face this one. Around the chamber, platforms began to move. Species that had been enemies, species that had been slaves, species that had been masters, all of them drifting toward the center. Toward each other, Elder Vorith was the first to speak. The Sarani agree. Then Caliph. The Moldrani agree. One by one, species announced their acceptance. Former tribute worlds. Former conquerors. Even the remaining council loyalists who had seen what unity could accomplish. Finally, Krelok stepped forward. The ancient High Arbiter who had ruled an empire looked somehow smaller now, but also somehow more at peace. The Valthran Dominion agrees, he said, and I offer myself as an advisor to this new alliance. Whatever knowledge I have gained in my 1,000 years, I place at your service. James nodded, accepting the offer. Then it is done. A new chapter begins today. Outside the station, the combined fleet that had defended against the void began to reorganize. Ships that had been enemies now flew in formation together. Communication channels that had been silent for millennia now buzzed with conversation. Somewhere beyond the galactic rim, a wound in reality had been closed by beings who had chosen to sacrifice themselves for people they had never met. And on a small blue world called Earth, 8 billion humans looked up at the stars and knew that they were no longer alone. They were part of something greater now. They were part of a family. The end.